ever wondered why some people seem to have a gift for music? Have you ever wished that you could play by ear, sing in tune, improvise and jam? You're in the right place. Time to turn those wishes into reality. Welcome to the Musicality Podcast with your host, Christopher Sutton.
In the first part of this two-part episode, we talked about where musicians encounter audio frequencies, what exactly a frequency is, and how they relate to musical sounds. If you haven't already heard that part one, then please go check it out. We'll have a direct link in the show notes for this episode. I'm going to assume you're up to speed on what frequencies are and how they're related to all the sounds we hear in music. And in this part two, I'm going to pick up where we left off. Why do frequencies matter to us as musicians? There are a couple of major reasons, and 1,000 smaller, more specific reasons, but I would say that the big two are these. The first is sound can be fully defined in terms of its frequencies. We're used to thinking of sound as something that can be heard or recorded, essentially the movement of air or the changing of numbers in a data file that makes our speakers move to reproduce a recording. And that is perfectly valid. But what's interesting is that all of this frequency stuff we've been talking about, it's not just a little add-on to how we can describe sound. It's actually a fully complete system for defining the sounds. Meaning that when we hear or record a sound, literally everything about it can be defined in terms of which frequencies are present, how strong, and when. The changing of frequencies in sound isn't just an aspect of sound, it is the sound. Which means that every interesting question you can ask about a musical sound, such as, what pitch is it? What's the timbre of the instrument? Is that an electric guitar or an acoustic one? Or is it actually a banjo? How many notes are being played? What does the environment sound like? Is it a small room or a concert hall? How is the singer pronouncing their words? What kind of effects pedals or plugins have been used to alter the sound? Every single one of those questions and more can be answered by analyzing the sound in terms of frequencies. That's not to say that frequencies are always the best way to answer a question like this. Sometimes the explanation in terms of frequencies is so deep and complicated that it's good for a computer but not much use to humans. But in other cases, frequencies provide a seriously simple and elegant answer to a question that's actually really hard to answer without them. In the example of the question about how many notes are present, you might remember from our interview with Jeremy Fisher that this isn't always a simple question, and sometimes frequency analysis can reveal subtle effects like extra ghost notes he was talking about, where two singers can actually produce a third perceived note. This means that if we're analyzing a sound or thinking about how to produce a sound in music, frequencies should absolutely be part of how we approach it, because they're not just a different way to think about sounds. They are a fully complete and comprehensive way to think about sounds. And this is a huge rabbit hole that I would love to dive into, but we'll leave it at that for now. Frequencies can fully describe a sound for us. The second big reason frequencies are useful and interesting to musicians stems from the first one. Not only can we analyze and think about and describe all musical sounds in terms of frequency, it's also a great way to manipulate those sounds. You might have already been thinking this as I went through those questions. If frequencies hold the answer to why does an electric guitar sound different to an acoustic guitar, then maybe they can also tell us how to make our acoustic guitar sound more like an electric. That might end up being about playing technique, or about adjusting the pickup you use to record, or doing post-processing on the sound, but frequencies can give you the clue as to what needs to be done. This also comes back to the example earlier of mixing desks and equalizer settings as a context for musicians interacting with frequency, because when you're recording your music, or producing a live show, it's essential to think not just about which notes are being played by who, when, but the overall mix of the sound in terms of its frequency balance. Learning to adjust certain groups of frequencies is an enormous part of making a recording or a live sound system sound good, and letting the music be enjoyed to its fullest. So I would say those are the two big concrete reasons to pay attention to audio frequencies as a musician, and maybe explore this topic a little bit. To circle back to our question at the beginning of part 1 of why we're talking about audio frequencies on the Musicality podcast, ultimately, we at Musical U believe that musicality is about having the inner understanding of music. You can call it intuition or instinct, or if you must, you can call it learned talent. That understanding which empowers and enables you to do whatever you want to in your musical life in a free, creative, and confident way. In that spirit, we should be open to any and every new way of thinking about music and exploring what's going on. And so I hope this episode has made a good case that audio frequencies aren't just some scientific or mathematical thing. They are an intrinsic and deep part of every musical sound you hear, and that makes them incredibly interesting and useful to every one of us as musicians. So, as I've said several times, this is a huge topic that we could do many more episodes on. Audio ear training is a whole area parallel to the kind of musical ear training we often discuss on the show. Would you like more episodes about the audio side of things and audio frequencies? Let me know by visiting musicalitypodcast.com/contact. In the meantime, if you're excited about these audio frequency ideas I've been sharing, I don't want to leave you empty-handed. We have a great free tutorial series on our website which you can check out called Frequency Fundamentals. You'll find a link to that in the show notes for this episode at musicalitypodcast.com.
Thank you for listening to the Musicality Podcast. This episode has ended, but your musical journey continues. Head over to musicalitypodcast.com, where you will find the links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as bonus content exclusive for podcast listeners. That's musicalitypodcast.com.